Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Marcus Woodard, Marketing Programs Manager here at Allego, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's session, Evolve into a Sales Coaching Powerhouse for the Virtual Future. For those who may not know us, Allego is a marketing leading sales enablement platform that wins sellers and buyers by combining learning, content, and collaboration into one app designed for the flow of work. At the conclusion of today's webinar, there is a brief 3-question survey, so help us out and take that survey at the end. Your feedback is much appreciated. This presentation is being recorded, and an on-demand recording will be emailed out in the next 24 hours or so. And we have reserved time at the end of today's session for a little Q&A. So submit your questions through the questions tab, but feel free to add to the chat as we go. I'll monitor and chime in when we can. I'm delighted to introduce today's speakers, Doug Hutton with Corporate Vision and Allego's own George Donovan. Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Marcus. And George, thanks again for having me on. I appreciate it. Hopefully this is what, 4th or 5th time we've done this together. Hopefully we can get it right this time.
At least. Yeah, I agree. Thanks for participating.
Hey, my pleasure. And so to evolve into a sales coaching powerhouse almost assumes that most sales organizations are not coaching powerhouses today. And I've got 3 numbers that may back up that case just a bit. And so for those of you following along, feel free to grab a pen, a paper, not only to take notes across the webinar, but to jot down these 3 numbers, 70, 90, and 68. And those 3 numbers tell a story about really the necessity of becoming a sales coaching powerhouse here in this virtual future. That first stat, 70%, comes from Rain Group. They surveyed sales leaders just before the pandemic. And the number 1 priority of their sales leaders was to get their teams to improve their ability to communicate value to customers. Pandemic or otherwise, the goal of sales really hasn't changed, which is get buyers to make decisions in your favor over the competition. So it makes sense that 70% of sales leaders would have that number 1 priority to communicate value. Now, on the flip side, CSO Insights surveyed buyers 2021, and those buyers, in a good news story, 90% of those buyers said they would actually meet with sellers earlier in the sales process. If, and it's a rather big if those sellers added value. And you can probably start to see where the story is going. Unfortunately, in that same study from CSO Insights, where they were asking buyers, 68% of those buyers said that there was little or no difference at all among the sellers that they spoke with. 7 out of 10 sellers desperately need the coaching, the development, etc., to be memorable and to actually stick out in their buyers' minds. Add to that the difficulty in a more virtual environment to stand out from the noise. I imagine even as George and I are presenting today, you might have your inbox pulled up on another screen. You might have a web browser up on another. But yet 7 out of 10 of the sellers on your team are really in no way, shape, or form memorable to the buyers they speak with. And so ultimately, how do your managers step up to the plate in that environment and actually coach to the outcomes that are necessary to give those sellers the right tools to be more memorable in that environment? So as you heard Marcus say, pull up that chat panel, because I'd love to just start a little bit of a chat, and I'll ask George to chime in here as well. Love to, in the chat, if you've got that chat open, would love to ask just what do you use in your organizations today to help your managers better coach? What tools do you use today in your organization to help your managers be better coaches? Feel free to put that in the chat box today. Similarly, 2 other questions. I like Mark's answer, none, simply using prior experience, which is interesting. We see methodology, training, training with Grow. I know several corporate visions clients use the Grow model as an underneath. Got some call recording going on. George, what are you seeing from your perspective on what tools folks just may be using today on the coaching side of things outside of Allego?
Yeah. Right, outside of Allego. I think a lot of these tools, whether it's Allego Conversation Intelligence or Gong or Chorus or others or other sales enablement platforms, they're all great for doing this, for supporting the coaching effort. But I think what we're going to find here, Doug, is like those beginning stats, is that a lot of people just aren't doing it. And they aren't doing it. If they are, they're not doing it enough. So that's part of the problem, is how do we get over that hump? And then how do we give them a methodology and the necessary technology to pull it off? Because it's not easy. And I would even take a step back and say, I think selling is, as a 30-year seller, I think selling is harder today than it has ever been. To get people's attention and to drive value to get people's attention is really hard. And that's why training and coaching is so critical to salespeople today.
Well, to your point of our managers actually doing it, again, in the chat box, when do you actually see your managers delivering their coaching? Love to see responses to that. When do you actually see your managers delivering their coaching? Is it right after they see a recorded call? Is it in a weekly one-on-one they may have with each seller? Sargon, thank you. Delivery is weekly. During onboarding, after listening to recorded calls. I think what we see here at Corporate Visions with our clients, and George, it does echo what you just said. Unless the coaching is part of a repeatable pattern that is embedded in what managers do day in, day out, it doesn't seem to happen. And I don't want to throw managers under the bus, because their jobs, like sellers, are more difficult than ever. But the when does seem to be most difficult, even if you've got all the tools in the world.
Agreed.
And this is more just a thought starter for the group. Why is this so important? Even beyond the numbers I laid out before, just leave that question in your mind. Why is this so important in today's buying environment, where we see buyers wanting more digital interactions than ever, which means actual seller face time in front of a client is lower than it has ever been, where you see more and more technology helping sellers, but is there at some point too much or the wrong technology not serving up what is necessary for great coaching along the way? Because ultimately, coaching in a virtual world, frankly, in a face-to-face world, has always and must continue to boil down to three big things. One, are your managers actually fluent, first and foremost, in the skills that you want them coaching to? Do your sellers see them as experts in the content that you want them coaching to begin with? Second, can they actually master the coaching moment itself? Do they know how to coach? And as things go to this more virtual, digital, inside type environment, do they know how to do that in that world? And lastly, are they leveraging the context of that world? Are they using the tools and technology that are at their disposal to do that well? And I would argue that even though perhaps what businesses are asking their sellers to learn, how they're asking managers to coach, and what they are using to do so, those three things underlie manager coaching, regardless of whether it's done face-to-face, virtually, or in a hybrid environment. They must reinforce the right content. They must master the coaching moment itself, and they must leverage the technology and tools at their disposal to maximize what their sellers get out of those interactions. So let's start on the first, because I even in today's environment where there is so much net new content, there's so much learning, so much to do on the seller side, do sellers actually see their managers and leaders as experts in the things that they need to be coached on to start with? And so for us, that's about making sure that managers know that a customer expansion conversation and motion with a prospect is not the same thing as a customer expansion conversation with an existing customer. Why? Managers need to fully understand the power of status quo bias in their territory. Because ultimately, if you're a sales manager who leads a team of hunters, who leads a team that is solely focused on net new business, that means that your coaching and the content you need to coach to is going to live entirely on the left-hand side of your screen. And ultimately, that means that the coaching that you develop and deliver must be focused and aimed on helping your sellers defeat their prospects' status quo. It means that you're helping your sellers and coaching your sellers to deliver a truly effective why change conversation and why now conversation. How can you equip your sellers to get your buyers to do something different than they are doing today? Now, let's say perhaps you're a customer success leader or an expansion sales leader, and your book of business lives entirely on the right-hand side of this diagram. Well, your coaching then needs to be fully focused on how you're going to help your sellers defend the status quo at their existing accounts. How are you going to help your sellers orchestrate the right why stay renewal conversations, the right why evolve expansion conversations, so that you can continue to keep and grow that book of business that you have? Now, I would say, though, that the managers who have the most difficulty in coaching, and frankly, the hardest coaching job overall, are those sales managers that live day in, day out on both sides of this divide, where some of your sellers or some part of their book of business is entirely focused on acquisition and the coaching needs to be around disruption, where others have it on the right-hand side of this page, where part of your team or part of their book of business is expansion. Because ultimately, those two selling motions, based on research we've done here at Corporate Visions, the buyers have different psychology on both sides of that coin, which then means that your sellers need different skills and content to best have those customer conversations, which ultimately means that for you as a sales leader, a sales manager, your coaching must be focused on the moment that buyer is in, because it is entirely possible that you could be delivering the wrong coaching to at the wrong time. Let me drill down one more layer on this, is that it's not just acquisition and expansion. There's even more detail behind that. Because yes, on the acquisition side, it's why change, why you? Why should your buyers do something any different than what they're doing today? And then if they choose to do something different, why should they do that with you over anybody else? That's acquisition-focused coaching, where you are going to help your sellers disrupt and differentiate. Again, on the flip side, it's why stay renewal, why evolve expansion, coaching focused on how sellers can help keep and grow. But in both of those motions, that's supported by the need that your sellers often have to have executive conversations, C-level conversations, regardless of whether it's expansion or acquisition. And those C-level buyers are asking themselves, why should I invest in your solution? Why should I do that now? Can your coaching align with those critical buyer decisions? Now, when you go to negotiate, again, whether you're negotiating an acquisition deal or an expansion deal, that negotiation is all about the buyer asking themselves, why should I pay what you want me to pay? What price should I ask? Why should I pay the price you want to put in front of me? And then ultimately, why should I sign it? Why should I navigate my own internal buying processes to get to the deal that you need done? And so ultimately, coaching must be situational. Coaching must be situational. And because it is situational, that means that the content that your managers coach to must be the right content and skill for that moment. Because if you are helping a seller prepare for a C-level conversation for the first time with an acquisition account, that is a different coaching moment than perhaps preparing to coach a procurement-centric conversation on an acquisition account. So let me just pause here for a moment before diving in. But again, coaching is situational, the right content needed. George, would love your opinion here on, you're a sales leader, actually more so than I've ever been. And I'd love your take on just your perspective from that of needing to be situational in the coaching you deliver and having that sort of right proficiency in the right moment to really help your teams out.
Yeah, completely. You have to be. You have to be. There's no just spreading the coaching peanut butter across the bread, right? You have to be very situational. Matter of fact, I see some comments in the chat, Doug, where I think Mohammed said, can less experienced people coach more experienced people? Situationally, absolutely. I'll take, inside our four walls here at Allego, we've got experts with a lot less experience than I have in certain areas. Perhaps it's vertical expertise, perhaps it's product expertise. And I will solicit their feedback in coaching because of that knowledge, even though they have less years of experience, perhaps selling, but they've got that situational awareness in that particular vertical or productization category. So always, you have to take into context what's going on with that salesperson, with that sales manager, the customer, the situation, where they are in their journey. It all depends on what you're coaching them on too. I think a lot of us just instantly focus in on coaching is deal coaching. And I saw a lot of comments in the chat where, oh yeah, forecast reviews and pipeline reviews. It's not just that. That is super important. But if we think of coaching just in that thread, we're not doing our jobs, right? We have to expand the lens of coaching to look at the employee more holistically. It could be coaching them on their career path. And that's very different than coaching them through a deal.
Mm-hmm. And I think what often gets lost, if the focus on coaching is just in the pipeline, the forecast, is that there is an underlying seller skill that will help them advance the deal in the forecast. There is an underlying seller skill that will help them have the next better customer conversation that will then lead that stage 3 deal to become a stage 4 deal. And I think it's that mapping back to what is it as a sales manager that I need to see my seller do differently or do better in that next conversation that's going to make that next forecast review more palatable with my boss, because I'm going to be able to show the progress through it.
Yes. Yeah.
So just to make this, so go ahead, George.
I was just going to say the chat is awesome. There's a ton of great back and forth and feedback here. We could spend all day just in the chat.
We can. It's fantastic. I love
slides.
Yeah. I like Jeff's point there too, that he just put in there, George, that there has to be a common language to coach too. I'd absolutely agree with that, because if one manager is calling acquisition net new logo versus versus hunting, even those little language differences just harm the ability to have a common approach to coaching. I think that's a good point.
Totally. Yep.
So just to make this one more step concrete. So again, just take that C-level example. Let's say that you are facing a stage 3 deal where to move it to stage 4, in your organization, you must deliver that C-level executive conversation with the right skill. And so it is knowing within any one motion, what are the critical pieces of content that the manager and seller must know? And so what you're looking at here, again, is in that elevate value executive conversations area, there are for us at Corporate Visions 3 key skill areas that you should be coaching to. One is, does your seller, prior to that executive conversation, do they take a buyer's perspective on the world? Do they understand from their C-level buyer's perspective how they view their world, what initiatives they have going on? Does that seller also then understand what business change that executive is trying to make in their organization? And you see that echoed here as well. What change are they trying to make? And then how do your products and services help them make that change? But then to make that change, though, any executive is going to want to justify economically the purchase that they're about to make. And that's about the ROI behind the purchase and the different types of returns. And so it is not about the whole universe of possible things you could coach on. Then it's no wonder that sales managers don't do it if they feel overwhelmed. But if they land it on the most critical skills and content that they can coach on, that's a much more repeatable motion for them as sales leaders It's also a much more repeatable motion than for sellers to know that for every executive conversation that I'm about to have, I need to make sure I understand my buyer's perspective. I need to make sure that I understand the change they're looking to affect in their organization and how they're going to justify the purchase with me over my competition. And then if you can parlay that into great coaching on those three things, you're going to have better executive conversations. You're going to get back to moving that stage 3 deal to stage 4. So that's what we mean by selling to content. Yeah, please, George.
I was going to say, I see this particular perspective a lot with junior sellers. And when they cross this chasm, they start to become more tenured sellers. The junior sellers tend to have, at least in my experience, have a little, right? They're a little myopic and they're thinking about themselves and how do I get my deal done? How do I sell my product? And they have a hard time pulling themselves back and putting them in the buyer's shoes and understanding the buyer's perspective, their motivation, their fears, what's in it for them, all those, the challenges and roadblocks that they have internally as buyers. Because we all know as veterans, the more you understand that, it makes your job easier as the seller, but it can be a nuance that's overlooked in early stages of a salesperson's career.
Yeah, absolutely. George, I'll turn it over to you here for these next couple, and I think you were sort of weaving into that already.
Yes, I was. Thank you. A couple more stats on coaching. We all know, I think we're here for a reason, right? We all believe in coaching. And this stat here that says almost 28% improvement in win rates if an organization is doing good coaching in B2B organizations. This might seem high to you. It's not that high. You've probably experienced something similar. I owned and operated a sales training company and coaching company for a decade. And when I work with my clients, I saw, if you really double down on coaching, you could move the needle 10, 20% pretty easily. It's that vital. So you start scratching your head if it's been proven in studies over and over again, or you have your own empirical experience that says it works. Why don't we do more of it? Well, Doug, next slide, please. It says one of the big reasons is I think sales managers don't know how. A lot of us, me included, years ago, good sellers. And what happens to good sellers, Doug? They get tapped on the shoulder and they say, "You are now a
sales manager."
You're now a sales manager, right? And they don't give them the tools and the training that they need. They say, "Go do what you did." And that is very hard to do. You can't scale that. A lot of people can't dissect what they did and help others do it. Sometimes you can, but it's hard to do. So what's the point here? The point is you got to give these sales managers some support in the form of training on coaching, and then the tools to help them to be able to coach. This is the most alarming stat ever. And when I first read this report, right, CSO Insights, we've all heard of them probably, but I misread this at least 6 times. I thought it said for almost 50% of sales managers spend less than 30 minutes per week. I thought it was per day. That's how much I'm kind of focused on coaching, right, because of my background. But it didn't hit me that this is per week. And if that's true, that is frightening, because we all agree that is the most powerful thing that sales managers can do is effective coaching. But if they're only putting in 30 minutes a week, that's a challenge, right? So I think this is probably a little bit high, but whatever, you pick your number, it's still not enough. So question in the chat, why? Just tell me why people don't coach enough in your organization. What are the reasons? We identified one is they don't know how, they don't have the right training, but what other reasons do you see? Okay, good, too busy. Yeah, Paul, we get that one a lot. I'm too busy to do it. So that's where we'll talk about tech a little later. No excuse, I love it. Too many priorities. Yeah, activity managers, good. Busy, don't know how, administrative nonsense, yeah, all the usual suspects. Thank you, everybody. Quote. Bill says quotas. I got to sell, right? And that's another common thing, Doug, right? It's the when these very successful salespeople get promoted to be sales managers, what do? Their go-to move is not to coach, it's to do. It's to put on the superhero cape, and I'm going to save the day. I'm going to close this deal for you. because they want to show the sellers how to do it, right? Which nothing wrong with that, but it's addictive behavior. Yeah. And if you see somebody who's been in that sales manager role for 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, 3 years, and they're still throwing on the superhero cape and starting to act like super reps and close deals for the reps, they're not doing their team any good long-term, right? That can only be done for a short period of time. Yeah, they're staying in their comfort zone. So watch out for that, folks. We got to break that habit for sure.
Will put an interesting question in the chat of, has this stat changed a lot over the last 2 to 3 years? Looks very similar to what it was before COVID impacts. I don't know what you're seeing, George. I don't have a stat to back this up. My hunch is that it's gotten worse, actually. From this perspective, and you and I have chatted about this offline a couple of times, the manager actually has today, post-COVID, more resources than they had before to coach, in the sense of tools, technology. There's been a lot in the space. We'll talk a little bit about that, how you can use that effectively. But not only that, they have a lot of recorded calls. They've been able to join more calls remotely, virtually, than they could go on a ride along. They actually have, it's almost the opposite problem, where they have so much now that helping a manager to identify where is my coaching time most valuable and where can I make the most difference, that it's overwhelming. And they just default to, well, if I manage the pipeline and I manage the forecast, well, that'll do me a solid. So I wonder if it isn't partially a problem now of we've overloaded managers with call recordings. We've overloaded managers with the ability to join so many calls, that actually where they need the most support right now is, yes, training on how to coach, but then being able to know through the right technology where I can spend that coaching time for maximum leverage with my team. I just get this sense in talking to sales managers that, like, we've hit a too much problem. And I actually don't know, without a great system to flag and understand where to hop in, that I kind of just throw up my hands and say, well, if I manage the pipeline, I'll get to where I need to be.
Yeah. Agreed. I think you're right. A lot of companies have invested in conversation intelligence, right? Allego is one of those providers.
Yep.
And as a consumer of our own technology, if it's not managed well, it can be overwhelming. There were days in the past where I would get 5 to 10 recorded calls, anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes each a day. There's no way I can listen to those. Absolutely no way. Right. So it does give you that feeling of being overwhelmed. And I'll talk a little bit later, Doug, about some of the newer technology that helps filter and bubble up some of the key points that you want to coach on, so you don't have to watch these calls ad nauseum.
Yeah. Well, let's forge ahead to get there. So we just talked about the content, how managers, to be great coaches, need to understand the content situationally that they need to coach to. But then it does get down to the how. How do you do this in a repeatable format? And so it is as easy as an acronym. And the acronym that we choose to use here at Corporate Visions is COACH, COACH. And let me just do a brief walkthrough of that. And the first C in that model is choose. Choose the right coaching approach. What do we mean by that? Is that, yes, it still requires the managers to meet their sellers where they are situationally, but choosing the right coaching approach is that mix of ability, skill, where is the rep on the skill you want to coach to, and what is their motivation to learn and improve on that skill. And so choosing the right coaching approach is a necessary precondition to having a great coaching conversation. Because perhaps early on in a seller's tenure, one of those more junior sellers that George was referring to earlier, the motivation is super high. They want to learn, but it is more of a training approach. They simply need the background on your company's products and services so that they can be better at it. And it is more training. Compare that to, though, perhaps a tenured seller who does have some great ability, but is a little bit lower on the motivation. And it's more of a consultative coaching approach. So yes, in your mind, what is the situational moment that this opportunity might call for? what is the skill they need to improve on, but having that personal lens to know what is their ability on that skill today, what is their motivation to improve on that, and how then do you as a leader vary your approach to that next coaching conversation. Once you understand that, though, to get to the next couple in the model, and this is where technology can absolutely help, is to look at an overview, O for overview, of that seller's book of business, or perhaps, again, to get back to our C-level example, there is an opportunity in front of that seller. You look at where that account is, you look at that upcoming conversation, and you see that the next conversation on the books is a C-level conversation next week. First C-level conversation in that account. And then from there, being able to assess what within that particular conversation needs to be coached to and developed. Perhaps for that conversation, it is the buyer's perspective. Maybe it's a acquisition deal. First time your seller's gotten to the C-level. And so you want to coach to and ensure with that seller that they have the right knowledge and insight about that buyer's view on the world, so that they don't get kicked out of that executive's office 5 minutes into the conversation because they're talking about products and services. And so again, this is where it comes back to, do you know, for the opportunity, account, or territory that you are coaching to, what is the right coaching moment and skill to coach to? And so I put up all these questions. Grab a quick screen capture here, because if you take one slide from this section, I think this is a good one, where depending on the situational moment you are in and what that next account or customer conversation will be, just a couple critical coaching questions to approach that conversation with. Once you've chosen that coaching approach, you understand where that next customer conversation needs to be, and then what skill needs to be exhibited in that customer conversation. You can pick and choose the right questions along the way. Just grab a quick screen capture there. I'll leave that up for a moment. But again, the whole goal of having the COACH model is to make this repeatable, so that every time you have a seller with a C-level conversation upcoming, that you can have a repeatable coaching interaction and don't need to go find new things each and every time. Which then leads to the last one. And I'll let you take a screen capture here as well, because this is your repeatable model. And I'll draw an arrow up to the top. Because ultimately, once you've assessed that, you then need to ensure and confirm that second C, how your seller is actually going to approach that next conversation. And then how are you going to know that the conversation is successful? And we'll talk in a few minutes about how tools and technology can help up and down this model. But ultimately, if you can structure your coaching interactions repeatably using this approach, that makes coaching easier for you as a manager and leader. Because ultimately, if you're going into each and every coaching conversation, trying to recreate the wheel every time, or going into each and every conversation unprepared, it's a lot more time for you as a leader spent just on prep rather than on actual coaching. And so that is just a simple model, a lot more detail behind this as well, but wanted to share just that simplicity with you here today. And George, I'd love, again, your perspective as a sales leader on just the power of having a repeatable coaching model for every coaching interaction you might have and how you approach that. Again, this is certainly not the only one in the world, but I'd love to hear from you, like the benefits you see out of that replicability and repeatability of coaching approach.
Yeah, I think it's critical. Back when I was in the sales training and coaching world, that was the first thing, Doug. It was, you have to have a model. Otherwise, salespeople or sales managers default to what they like, what they know, comfort zones. But if you can get them all coaching on the same model, now they can help each other, right? The sales managers can help each other and collaborate on different situations. But if they're all talking different language and coaching differently, they're not able to collaborate between each other. And it's also can be confusing between sellers too. who sometimes jump between groups. So you're getting coached by one person one way and then another person another way. And that's not beneficial to anybody. Doug, question for you. Robert had a question, which I thought was a good one. I don't know how much time you can spend on this, but it says, can you describe how your clients, where'd it go? Can you describe how your clients who use the GROW model, harmonize,
Yes.
grow, coach? Any quick comments on that?
Yeah, and I see them sort of as layers, and how our clients have used that. Because often what we see is like GROW is a full-on organizational coaching model, sales, leadership, everything. And where we see coach coming into play is for the interaction itself and the preparation for the coaching interaction. I'm about to sit down one-on-one with a seller on my team, and it navigates the interaction. And specifically, and the words I would take out of this, Robert, and any others who are in this boat. Let me back up there. Sorry, I wanted to. Is these words right here. Territory, account, or upcoming customer conversation. And the reason I call out those words is that the best skill coaching in the context of what George and I are talking about today is going to have immediate applicability to an upcoming customer event, conversation, account plan, you name it. And so if you think about GROW at a more like macro umbrella level, and you think about coach at the interaction level, and specifically the interaction level for an upcoming selling conversation or selling moment, that's how the two can work together. And yes, there is certainly some overlap between sort of the how of the coach model and the W way forward of the GROW model, certainly. But I think it gets us to the broader, like, how do I want to coach this individual overall? How do I want to make them better in their job? To coach of like, there's a very specific upcoming customer conversation, upcoming sales motion that I want to get better at. And this is the way that I can use that together. And for those of you who don't know it, just as I see it pop up, GROW, it's an acronym. It stands for goal, reality, options, way forward. And so we have some clients who use both.
Cool. And I'll answer, thanks, Doug. I'll answer a couple here. See a few people ask, best practice for coaching, is it one-on-one or is it in a group? I would say absolutely one-on-one is the preferred method, but if you can double up and do group coaching too, that's really, really powerful because obviously you get one-on-many. Group coaching is very good when you're reviewing game tape or game film, as I call it, or practice film, where you can, if you have calls recorded with customers and you can play it for the group and then have a conversation around what was good or what was bad in that call and point out the key moments of what specifically was good, what specifically was bad. And if it was bad, how would you course correct that? So the answer is both.
And that does add an interesting comment. George, you made the point before that can more junior folks coach more senior folks if they've got the right knowledge? Yes. Yes. Same is true on the, I know I've been couching all my language from a sales manager and sales leader perspective. Peers can coach too, sure. Especially when they've got the technology to do so. It does not always need to be managers. I think it's a must-have objective for managers. But that group coaching and that ability of peers to comment in a fashion where, hey, I used this approach in this conversation, it didn't really work. I used this approach over here and it really did work. Hey, I'd love to just share that. And when you do have the recording, when you do have the game film, and you can show that very quickly with snips to others, that can be equally as powerful. So yes, I'm anchoring on managers and leaders being the ones who sort of own the capability, but it can certainly be anybody.
You got it.
And let's get into that, the coaching tools and technologies. And here it is all about really combating that too much problem. And how do you use the right tools, the right technology to narrow a manager's focus so that they can coach on the highest leverage elements? Because again, George and I know, and everybody on the webinar here probably knows it even better than we do, that the world of the sales manager and leader is not getting any easier. And I see George's title in his Zoom title here. For folks like George, Chief Revenue Officer, they are making requests of managers to do more of these things across their teams. So it is not an easy job. How do you make it easier? focus on the things that are going to make the most difference, those highest leverage tools, highest leverage moments, highest leverage technology along the way. And so in the world of corporate visions, that means that, to George's point of team and group coaching, standardize that. Use a coaching kit of some kind to navigate your team meetings. Give each one a structure and give each one an opportunity to have some peer-based and manager coaching in that group. From a call observation perspective, be it recorded call or otherwise, make sure that those calls you are seeing, hey, did my seller actually use in that recorded call the conversation planner that we had prepped with? If, again, using that C-level example, did that C-level individual, that conversation, go like the planning that we had done in advance? Similarly, for opportunity planning, even heck, for a forecast, are you using a repeatable coaching model and approach? So from our perspective, it's all about sort of reducing the world of tools, technology, skills to the ones that give the manager the highest leverage opportunities, rather than try to do everything. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's got that kind of time. But can you provide your teams with the tools and technologies that lets them be sort of the best coach they can be? So from the corporate vision side, that's things like coaching kits, call observations, et cetera. But George, let me turn it over to you to how like technology really plays a role in this.
Yeah, agreed. I think it goes back to your, a couple of points you made earlier. You got to have a methodology. Everybody's got to be on the same page, and you've got to have a system and a process to be able to do it. Before I jump into this slide, a couple things on some of the comments. Steve, your question about some people are not coachable and some managers can't coach. I would say hire for that. Screen for that. I know we try to do it. It's not always possible, but you tell people that you've got a strong coaching culture and you want to ask salespeople questions that will lead to discover if you can coach them or not. And you want to ingrain in your candidates for sales managers that this is really, really important, and understand and make sure they can articulate how they've done it in the past. And then if you get them in your world and they can't be coached, that's a problem for me. I would say they're not going to be a salesperson very long if they can't take coaching and respond to it. So that's the reality. And then any suggestions for a coaching kit? Yes, CVI. Call Doug. Call Doug. He'll help you.
And I'll just give the quick structure of the ones that we use, because I think it's a good structure, regardless of the methodology you espouse. First, it starts with, again, a content review around a particular content. What is the skill you want your teams to demonstrate? Then we move into actually a dialogue and discussion with the team. What does good look like? What have you tried? What works? What doesn't work? And then giving the team a short assignment for them to actually do. And here at Corporate Visions, we use Allego for that, where you can actually just, hey, I just need a 60-second, 2-minute video on like how you've outlined the buyer's perspective for a C-level executive. Then share that around with the team. Let's come back to the table next week. And again, see what folks did well or not. So it's sort of a good coaching kit follows the framework we've outlined here. Right content, right coaching approach and discussion, ultimately leveraged by the technology as well.
Cool. Speaking of technology,
let's go there.
The title of this discussion is about how to build it into your organization, right? An extreme coaching culture. And to be able to do that, we've talked about it can be overwhelming to coach. If you don't make time, if you don't have technology to help you, it's a challenge to do, right? The good news is I'm in an office today. I'm sitting next to salespeople. I'm hearing them. I can coach them. I'm traveling with salespeople. I'm hearing them. I can coach them. But in addition to that, all of our sales calls on Zoom are recorded. And many of you had conversation intelligence type products. That's one way we can coach, right? Another way is just through sales enablement platforms like Allego, and it's having people practice their messaging, practice their decks, practice their handling objections, practice answering the top questions that they get, and submit those practice recordings to you as the coach or to the manager as the coach and get feedback. And in our platform, this is what it looks like. You actually get point in time feedback right there. congratulating the seller, what they did well, what they should improve upon, how they should improve it. So you can give coaching in line in these practice sessions. So I'd encourage everybody, this is such an easy thing to do, to have people practice so they're not practicing on live bodies, or also known as customers and prospects. Next slide, please. Another cool feature here is, in our product and some other products too, are things called virtual coaches. This is where a seller can get a little bit of self-coaching, right? We know the managers should be doing it, and that's always the case, but it's nice to give them a little bit of self-coaching that is guided by the management team. And what that looks like is a rep practices their messaging. Again, it could be a deck, it could be a value prop, it could be answering questions. And the system is actually looking at things like, how fast do they talk? Are they really slow and boring? Are they too fast and they talk like this? And they can confuse people. There are reps like that. We've all seen it. So you can coach them to stay in this right pattern of talking, maybe a little faster, a little slower sometimes, but generally in a range. That's one thing. Two is filler words. We all use them. It's normal, it's natural, it's fine. Some people use them extensively and it's very distracting. The system could pull that out and say, stop saying this. Third thing might be, I call them hot and cold words. Things you want your sellers saying are hot words, phrases. These are things you want them weaving into conversations. The system can identify those and point them out to you. Or things you don't want them saying, like I'll use one we can all relate to, discount. You don't want salespeople using the word discount. And if that's being used over and over again in their talk tracks, the system's going to flag that for you. So this is AI, right? A little bit of AI being used to filter up key points of conversations so sellers and managers can take action or know how they're doing. It's like a dashboard. Next slide, please, Doug. Not a briefing today. Yes, conversation intelligence. This is a screenshot of conversation intelligence. Most of you are probably familiar. For those of you who aren't, conversation intelligence is recording sales calls, and not just recording them, but layering on analytics on top of the call. So you can see talk time between the salesperson and the prospect. You can see the number of questions that the salesperson asked, when they were asked in the call. You can see the amount of switches. So how many switches in the conversations were there throughout the call? You can give feedback on this, just like we showed in the previous screen, where a manager can review a call and type or talk or put a video into this video so the salesperson can get point in time feedback on their sales calls. So this is the game tape. As we know, the best athletes in the world, they watch game tape and they watch practice tape. So you can do both in systems like Allego. What Doug is showing now is just a transcript of the call. I love this. This is great because you can take these transcripts, you can pop them right into Salesforce or your CRM. And guess what? Now you've got a history of the call. You've got the video recording and the transcript. You don't have to take notes anymore. One more, Doug. Yeah, a bunch of call stats. This is what I love the best personally, and I hear this from our customers too. It's great to do feedback, for managers to give feedback and coaching on calls. It's wonderful. Sales reps get all this great information about their calls, but I like to look at hundreds or thousands of calls that were recorded, and you can start to compare and contrast top performers to medium performers and low performers, and what are the things that are happening in calls between those three groupings. Okay, for example, I'll give you a real life example in our world. Our top reps ask twice as many questions as our mid-performing reps, and 3 times as many questions as our lower performing reps. So what does that tell you, right? We know, again, in my world at Allego, our salespeople, we know how many questions we want them asking during a call. Not only that, we know that the top performing reps have twice as many switches. That's a change in the conversation where I might be leading the conversation, then the customer chimes in, then I start talking, then the customer starts talking. We know in our world that if it's all one way and then there's one big switch and it's all the other way where the customer's talking, that's not a good call for us. We want a call that's very dialogue centric and back and forth centric. So you can map out these trends to know what good looks like and coach to that. Keep going.
I love this. I love this one, George, if I could chime in here, because
Yeah.
it finally brings data to something that Corporate Visions has been saying forever, that like a sales call is a sales conversation. It is not a sales monologue. It is not, it is a back and forth conversation between the two. And it's why we focus so much of our efforts on coaching to those conversational skills, because ultimately, as basically your data is proving, the sales conversation must be two-way for it to be as compelling as possible. Sometimes that's going to be questions from one to the other. Sometimes that is just the natural switch of back and forth, and may not be questions of it. Just, hey, you said something interesting, I said something interesting. We're going back and forth. And so to me, if too much sales coaching is just predicated on what the seller conveys and communicates, that's actually missing the boat on the necessary conversation skills to ensure that the sales conversation is as productive as possible and pushing that ahead as much as possible. So I'm glad to see the data that it is a conversation that wins and not a speech or monologue that wins.
Yes, absolutely. And Doug, I'm missing some of the chat, but I caught a couple here. One is about call recording. Yeah. Right. How can it be done? Yes, you can capture audio. You can capture audio and video. It is legal. You do want to disclose it. The system does disclose it when they're being captured. I think other than California, you can't really do it in California too well. But we're amazed. We started selling this capability about 2 years ago. Tech companies were buying it like this. And we thought we have a lot of financial services and life sciences companies, med device, pharmaceuticals. And we thought, geez, they're never going to be able to buy it because of legal constraints. I was wrong. They're all buying it now. Everybody's buying it because of COVID and how many sales calls are being recorded or are on Zoom like this. Everybody wants the intelligence, so might as well take advantage of it. Okay, I know we're running out of time. I don't want to save some questions and some time for Q&A. So go a couple more, one more click. This is one real cool one here, Doug. I'm not even sure. You might have just seen this recently. This is a new product for us. This is a fun way to practice. This is an AI person on the left side of your screen and a real person on the right side. And it is a dialogue between the seller on the right side and the simulator on the left side. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure. So let's say the customer says, and the simulator says, hey, I think your price is too high. I want a discount. There's a path, a choose your own adventure path that the salesperson can go down, and then they have their talk track and it's all recorded. So once they do this minute-long exercise on how to answer this objection, it's submitted to their manager for coaching, and they get coaching. But rather than just talking to a blank screen, they're actually interacting with the simulator. So a really cool new feature that we're excited about, and we've been using internally with great success for a while now. One more, Doug, and I think I am done. And then, this next one's called Show Reels, another new feature for us. This is if you, I'll again use our Allego's own real life situation. We came out with something 9 months ago called digital sales rooms. Okay, digital sales rooms, a cool new feature, new product for us. And I wanted to see everybody talking about it. So I could search on all our recorded calls, digital sales rooms, and Show Reels will produce a reel of 1-minute clips of 10 calls within a certain time period or a certain subset of reps, any way I want to segment it, talking about that product instantly. So talk about scaling your coaching. Like if I want to know what's going on with how we're representing digital sales rooms, I can put that in, filter on it, boom. And within seconds, I can have a show reel that shows me snippets of conversations by multiple people across our corporation talking about digital sales rooms. Pretty cool. I think of it like I could go watch a game, spend 3 hours watching a game, or I could watch 30 minutes of SportsCenter and get the same highlights, right? Or go online and look at the video clips of the game. Same type of concept. If you don't want to sit, if you can't sit through the whole call, You want a show reel of the call? This is an awesome way to do it. We're really excited about this.
I was going to say, when we first learned of this one, George, we were pretty excited about this for exactly this reason. The ability to pick up again, it's all about the highest leverage time and moment for the managers. This effectively reduces their call recording viewing time to the most relevant time that they need to look at.
Yes.
And so what might have taken 10 minutes of searching, an hour of watching, as now a minute of searching, 10 minutes of watching. And now that freed up an hour of my time to actually then go coach to what I saw, both in the platform, but then in conversation with the rep. So I think this whole section around leveraging the context of the manager's world to me is all about leverage. Like, I'm a busy person. How can I make sure I, as a sales leader and manager, are spending my time most wisely? And
Absolutely.
all of this type of stuff impacts my ability to free up my time to do the things that I'm best at, which, by the way, isn't searching for calls.
Yeah, exactly. And I love, where else I love it? When you get asked by, my partner, the CMO, or my boss, the CMO, hey, how are the sales reps doing talking about this new product? Again, boom, produce a show reel, send them the show reel. They can see for themselves. They don't take my word for it. So, and
then you cross your fingers, and marketing crosses their fingers. Hope they produce the right assets to start with.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I appreciate this. I think this has been like the most chat informed webinar that we've done together. This is clearly a hot topic for folks.
I agree. I thank you, audience. Thank you for the fantastic feedback and questions and comments.
Absolutely. And so again, just to land on this slide, again, grab a screen capture, share it around with your organizations, because ultimately, to supercharge your sales coaching for that virtual future, whether it's virtual, whether it's live, whether it's hybrid, your managers must know the situational skills and content that they need to be coaching to and reinforcing. If they don't have that skills fluency as the base, the rest of it becomes a lot harder to do. Then how can you provide them with a repeatable framework as to how to coach? How do you ensure that for those new managers that just got tapped on the shoulder, but even those tenured ones, how do you ensure that they know and are trained on how to coach effectively well? And then lastly, how are they using the right tools and technology to have those high leverage coaching moments where their time is used most effectively and their seller's time is used most effectively when they go through that? And so from both of Allego and Corporate Visions, want to give you a bit of a takeaway here from the Corporate Vision side. And Marcus, if you wouldn't mind just dropping that link in the chat for folks to click on as well. There's an ebook here as to how you can make this come to life in your organization from that just-in-time situational approach. So appreciate that from the Corporate Vision side, and certainly from the Allego side as well. The e-brief on your side, George, any commentary on this one here? Because this one's new for me too.
Yeah, I would just say that this is a good overview of, I'll say it this way. A lot of us woke up 5 years later and had a whole bunch of sales tools and, they don't talk to each other. They're expensive. They're hard to manage. And a lot of sellers don't use them all. We have to think about how to consolidate our tech stack and how to prepare for the next 5 years. And that's what this will help you with.
Awesome. I think we hit almost every question in the chat as best we could. Marcus, did we miss any here for the last couple of minutes?
Yeah, we've got probably 2 minutes left. I've got one question from Linda. Any tips to improve forecast confidence and to focus on profit?
I'd say
that's another webinar.
Yeah, right. All right. Now we've got our topic for the next one.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Linda.
I would say taking the approach we discussed and aligning your coaching with deals and ensuring that the practice and the game film that goes along with that is very deal centric is going to improve the forecast confidence, because then you as a manager will know with better consistency whether or not the efforts you are working on and that seller is having is paying off in actual customer conversation. The profit side is all about that capture value negotiations pillar That's about coaching to the skills that ensures your sellers aren't giving away too many discounts along the way.
One more, Marcus?
Yeah, I can do one more. I actually, yeah, quick one here. How often do you need to coach? What is the trigger?
Ooh, that's a provocative question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We've got two.
I'll take this one. I would say often, as much as you can, right? Really get, the key for me is to co-create a coaching plan with your sellers, right? If it comes across as you are telling them what to do, it's not nearly as impactful and powerful as having them ask for the help. There's an old saying, coaching should be caught and not taught, right? So what does that mean? That means that they have to be open to receiving the feedback and agree that they need to work on certain things. And as a manager, broadening your scope, getting away from just deal coaching and really broadening your scope on the whole persona.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. As a reminder, please fill out that 3-question survey at the end. And if you have any recommendations for us, please leave them there. As a reminder, we'll be sending out the on-demand recording later today. And special thanks to Doug and George. Great session, guys. A lot of chat going on. Good questions. And thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks,
Bye.
audience. Thanks, Marcus, Doug, Sala.